My name is Dr. Luis Martinez, and I'm the Director for Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Trinity University. We're thrilled that you're joining us now for the second part of a conversation of what does the future of entrepreneurship look like. If you've heard our first sort of installment of the series, you get a real deep sense about sort of what entrepreneurship looks like from the perspective of two entrepreneurs that are working currently in the ecosystem. And it's really important to sort of capture those voices. Do some scheduling with regards to recording that first session. We're really thrilled for the second part to be able to have and continue that conversation with Beto. And we're gonna say at the onset that the goal of these sessions are to do a really important thing. It's to capture what the future of entrepreneurship looks like from the voices of individuals who are doing it right now in the community, but who have sort of a good part of their career still to do that work. So it's about listening to the future of entrepreneurship by the individuals who'll be shaping that future. And so we're thrilled to have Beto here on this conversation. And so Beto, we're gonna start in many ways that we started that previous session.
Yeah.
What did the world look like to you, and what is it that you were doing in sort of January, February of 2020?
Awesome. Thank you, Luis. It's a pleasure to be here and to share the stories that we're going to talk about with the audience. I hear that, the Startup Week has been a success, right? And I hope it continues to be so for coming years, because I think that, entrepreneurship and, building ecosystems that help entrepreneurs, it's about nurturing the environment, right? And I think, Luis, you do it very, very well. And we're thankful for this, the service, commitment, and dedication that you have to your community, Luis, because you are definitely building entrepreneurs locally. You're helping them thrive in this environment. And I think all San Antonians should be thankful for the work that you're doing in the entrepreneurial world.
Well, I really, really appreciate that. And to throw it back to you, we've just been so incredibly proud of the success that you've had. I remember a very early pitch that you gave very early when you sort of started this entire journey. And so it was a little rough, and it was, we're not quite sure of the idea. And I know a guy who's doing all the stuff on the back end. So with all that success of the things that have happened and the Forbes and it's really been a remarkable story. So I think it's important to capture sort of the sense of to understand where the future is and your perspective of the direction that we're moving in, about sort of understanding not only the present moment of COVID that we'll talk to some a bit, but also sort of the past. So tell us a little bit about sort of what the world looked like to you sort of January, February, the work that you were doing at, I believe it was a former brand of your version of your company.
That's right. So it's January 2020, right? I can't believe we're still in the year 2020. It's been a wild year, right, to say the least. And talk about resiliency, right? How it's October, right? And we're bouncing back slowly but surely. And that's what, I'm so excited about. I'm excited about how humans will, become more resilient because of this experience. And I'm interested in seeing what's going to happen afterwards, right? There's going to be a post-COVID world that is being shaped right now. But in January 2020, I had heard about the virus happening in different parts of Asia, specifically in China, right? And I remember that there was a lot of noise about it, right? But the markets weren't disrupted. Entrepreneurs were not really worried about what was happening. They were cautious, but it wasn't a shift in focus yet, right? For me, I was raising money. So it was a wild ride, because I went to market to raise venture funds in the late fall of 2019.
So a year ago, you started raising money.
Exactly, yeah. It was around November, late October. And the whole idea was that I was gonna raise capital. It was my seed round, right, to keep growing what we were calling at the time City Flag, right? Irys is the company today, but formerly known as City Flag, right? City Flag was more descriptive and functional, right? And it was also because our vision was about improving the communication between people and government.
Right.
So that was the vision for City Flag. And City Flag was descriptive and functional because you place a flag in your city for the things that you see, right? So City Flag, right? We came up with that name early on in the process of building that company, and it was a great experience. But when I was raising money, I was also pitching the next vision of City Flag. We didn't have a name yet, right? It's Irys today, right? But the vision was to move away from just working with governments to work into the private sector, right? Work with clients such as engineering firms, architecture firms, and also tap into the military sector. We had just begun working, through a phase one with the SBIR and AFWERX initiative. And it was very interesting to see how we were also tapping into that vertical, right? And so we knew that we needed to shift our vision, right, from improving the communication between people and government to improving the quality of life in communities through the use of technology. And so at the time, raising money, I was pitching this vision, right, and the success that we had achieved with CityFly. But again, there was noise about there was a virus going on, right?
Yeah.
But I don't think that entrepreneurs, or in general, everyone around the world, were thinking about how rapidly this virus was going to develop, right? Yes, of course, your scientists and the science community in general were making aggressive warnings about this virus, right? But us entrepreneurs, or let's say professionals in the business world, we're not hyper-focused on the collateral and damage that this virus was going to create, right? So I would continue raising money, right? That was my number one priority at the time. I wanted to close the round before spring, right? I wanted to raise for 6 months and close before spring. And then I get to the last, I had raised 80%, almost 90% of the round. And then I take a trip to Europe, and this is really interesting. I take a trip to Europe. It was kind of like a vacation, right? But I was also meeting with some investors in Europe because we received investment from Irys, which is a corporation that focuses on engineering, designing, and architecture. And on that way, I was with my wife, and we did a detour to Spain, and it was the last week of February. Okay. Yeah, exactly. So things were getting kind of weird in Europe regarding the virus. Yeah. And we get to Madrid, and we start, seeing the news about Italy, and everything that is happening in Italy is blowing up. The virus is spreading everywhere, right? And we're looking at the news, and we also start hearing a lot of rumors by the Uber drivers or people, on the streets, that Madrid is going to be the next, hotspot in Europe. And we are there. We are in Madrid, okay? And so I kind of, you start kind of panicking, right? You start getting this anxiety, right? Yet we went around the city, right? But at the time, I saw how the people were reacting to the virus and the news that they were hearing on the TV, right? And the reaction was aggressive. I saw a lot of people, talking about it, on again, Uber, taxi drives, everything, right? And people started panicking, right? I remember we went to this market, right, in Madrid, a very famous market, and it was almost empty. It's usually, there's a lot of people, right? But then we went back, right, and there were people. So it was kind of weird, right? It was like yes and no, but it was very, inconsistent. But when
the remarkable thing about your experience is that if we think about sort of where you are in your business in 2020, you had sort of multiple footprints, right? You were in San Antonio, you were in sort of the Valley, you were also in Mexico, right? So you had this real interesting sort of statewide, global, international perspective of where things were up until
exactly. And I was looking at it, right? So I was vacationing, but I was there also for business, right? So I started seeing how people are reacting in Madrid, and then I fly to London, and I start seeing how people are reacting. This is the first week of March. I get back to the States, and I have a speech to give at a Harvard Business School, and that same weekend, right after I got home, from Madrid and London. And then I look at the news, and everything's exploding in Madrid. And I was just there 3 days ago, right? And then I'm in Harvard, and I'm giving a speech, and then it gets canceled. They cancel school at Harvard. They cancel classes. And so I'm there, stuck. And I was supposed to give another speech in DC with the Aspen Institute Center for Innovation, and that also gets canceled. So I'm looking at how the virus is now affecting our everyday lives immediately, right? So when I get to San Antonio, right, I talk to my business partners. I tell them about the chaos that I saw overseas and the chaos that I saw in the East Coast, and how I knew this was coming over to Texas for sure, right? in less than 2 weeks, San Antonio, got completely, hotspotted by the virus, and things, went south, right? Again, by that time I had raised 80% of my fund. I had 20% to go. And the investor that was going to come in,
right,
backed up. He said, I'm not going to invest right now because I feel I want to be cautious about my decision. And that's what happens, right? When you have this type of black swan events, such as economic recessions, pandemics,
right,
they change the trajectory of governments, economies, and businesses, right?
And you're right in the middle of it, right?
They alter the course of everything. Exactly. And pandemics have a direct impact on biological and psychological and economic, dimensions, right? And so when you think about that, the psychological dimension affected my business directly, which was the investor's decision to not come in at that time, right? And so that was very unique, right? Because you saw how that pandemic was now having a direct impact in my business in less than a month, right? In less than a month, that switch. And again, I think the 3 dimensions that are affected right away after a pandemic or some sort of black swan event is biological, right? Is psychological and economics. The psychological affects the economics directly. And so that happened to me. So I had to, find a strategy, right, to persuade another investor or that same investor to come in, to have the confidence in what I was selling, the vision of Irys, right?
And this is at the time, by the way, where the beginning of March, where capital markets and early stage markets are saying, we're not going to write any checks.
Exactly.
The only thing that's currently we're going to talk about is things that are currently in the pipeline because we've already done due diligence, because we don't know whether or not this is a short term, long term. There's so much uncertainty. I remember sort of the beginning of April, the sort of feeling of what's happening, what's going on. There's this fear, the stock market's going crazy, people aren't taking meetings anymore. And so you're not trying to go out and raise money. And at the same time, you're trying to make sure that your company is serving the customers that you need to serve.
Exactly. So it was a balancing act, right? And so, but at the same time, we had a strategy. We had developed a new name, a new brand, and a new shift in focus, right? Which was to improve the quality of life in communities, right? Through the use of technology. And the name was Irys, right? We shifted from City Flag to Irys because Irys is the part of your eye that allows you to see color and structure, right? And so, it allows you to see what's in your neighborhood, what's in your surrounding, what's in your building, in, the place where you work. But it can also be the name of your neighbor, right? Irys. So it's about community building. And so we developed that brand from January to March. The pandemic hits, and literally in April, we launched a new campaign, a rebranding campaign in the middle of the pandemic. Right?
Yeah, and so let's dig into that a little bit, right? So there's a lot of uncertainty, right? Like people are beginning to get really ill. The hospitals are getting crunched. The state of Texas is in lockdown. San Antonio, Bexar County is in lockdown. People are staying at home. A lot of businesses would have chosen to sort of hit the pause button. A lot of businesses fairly, and we have some of the callers that'll be in, or people reviewing the video, right, realized that their business began to dry up and that they wanted to sort of keep their powder dry for how long this thing happened. You guys just went forward with it. Well, what went into your minds about not waiting? What urgency gave you, or what were the sense of the confidence that you had, that you felt, this is a great time for us to go ahead and boom, go ahead and expand our business and decide to go ahead and revamp our brand and our name?
Definitely. I think the nature of innovation is often incremental, right?
Okay.
But at the same time, I think innovation is essential for survival and adapting to our new normal, right? And so I saw that in that moment. I saw that I needed to adapt to a new normal. And I think a lot of newborn entrepreneurs or startups, right, were very opportunistic about, the pandemic, right? They pivoted their businesses through, the repurposing of their focus as a service or product.
Right.
And for us, we saw an opportunity in helping bureaucracies go digital, right? And that's what's happening today. So instead of being paralyzed, we ran towards our fears in that moment. And we had so much anxiety as a startup and as entrepreneurs, as founders, that we didn't know how to channel our energy, right?
Right.
But we found a way to do it. What we did is that in 2 or 3 weeks, we built a product that was geared towards helping people identify symptoms related to COVID-19, to report price gouging, and to also learn about resources online for financial help or mental health. And so we launched this tool openly to anyone around the world for free. And we had users in London, in Sydney, in Mexico City, in San Antonio, in Austin. We had over like 20,000 users, and it was free. It was open to anyone can use it, right? But we instead of being paralyzed, right? Again, we ran towards our fears and we said, hey, let's build something with this energy that we have, right? We're during lockdown. Let's build something. And we had already rebranded to Irys, right? And our goal was to improve, the quality of life in community. So why not build something related to the COVID crisis? And we did. And that caught the attention of several investors. Really? Because my pitch now was that, bureaucracies need to go digital, right? We saw how government was struggling with PPE products at the time.
Yes.
Heavily, right? Because the procurement processes for governments are so outdated that they become reactive, not proactive. And in the face of a pandemic, right, they become stagnant. And so we saw that, procurement needed to innovate itself, right? But it wasn't going to take the government to do it. It was going to take entrepreneurs to do it. And I actually gave a speech at a panel focused on procurement for the Aspen Innovation Center for Urban Innovation with Jennifer Bradley. She invited me to talk about my experience in going through procurement during a pandemic crisis, right? And I spoke about maybe exploring vehicles where you give your tools for free, right? So that governments can be more proactive themselves and say, hey, we need to adopt these tools, and then maybe they purchase them later on, right? But in that moment, we saw that governments needed to go digital. They needed to become digital. So we took the opportunity. We started launching our tools with several governments across the US and Mexico as well, and Europe. And we were giving them the dashboard and the app, the COVID tools. They can use it for free. Why? That's what a lot of people were asking me. Why are you doing that?
Right.
And I say, hey, look, right now business is paralyzed. I'm not going to do a lot of business development for the next 2 months. But you know what I can do? I can repurpose my efforts, right, in selling my bread and butter products, which are the 311 tools, and now the City Shaper tool, which is for the private sector, or the military tool. And instead of selling those right now for the next 2 months, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to build relationships across the world. And when things slow down, right, the pandemic slows down, I'll go back to them, and they know that I was there for them, when things were tough. And maybe I can explore business opportunities later on with those relationships that I built. Because at the end of the day, business is personal. Business is about the relationships that you build, right? It's not just showing up and knocking on someone's door and selling them a service or a product. It's about building a consensus, a mutual understanding that you want to benefit, their performance at whatever they're doing through your service or product, right? It's about building those relationships. And sometimes entrepreneurs forget about that, right? Sometimes entrepreneurs forget about the importance of relationship building. So when we did that, we had a series of, connections throughout the world, and we had so much data on how our tools were being utilized, right? And something very interesting happened. Arcadis, which is one of our investors, comes in and says, I like what you're doing with the COVID-19 tool, right? What would be very interesting is that you develop some sort of tool for resiliency planning. So whenever we're coming in as a development company, right, and we're building roads and bridges and you name it, we can have a two-way communication with those communities so that we can introduce their ideas into our development plans, right? It's about smart cities. It's about developing ecosystems that places the citizen at the center of innovation and development, right? And so we had talked about that idea in October of 2019, but they became convinced during the pandemic that this was the way to go, because what was happening, Irys, was that a lot of public involvement efforts, right, that these companies do, right, or move forward in different communities were shut down because you couldn't have face-to-face meetings, right? So they needed a way to get public's input through a digital medium.
And it was really interesting, right? There's this sort of niche with resiliency that's about the moment. I mean, I think it's interesting in sort of our conversation so far is that, you're talking about two kind of like really kind of boring industries, right? That were pretty well developed, right? No, I'm serious, right? Procurement. Like a year ago, that was kind of boring and it was all set. And we saw with the pandemic, and we saw with how supply chains got frozen, how it is that all manufacturing in China and in Mexico immediately moved to protective personal equipment, to PPE, and like people weren't getting supplies. And so like it's really clear that procurement was a critical pain point that was under incredible stress at that moment. And this aspect of resiliency that sort of flies out of that, right? It's just like, because before that, resiliency planning is like, we're going to go through exercises and tabletops, and it's in a book somewhere, it's in a manual, and we'll have the sort of simulation. But now you're talking about like really doing it in real time. And what I love about sort of the approach about what you're talking about that relates to what was said in the earlier session, it's about data-driven and community-centered, right? Exactly. So this aspect of resiliency and procurement, that is the spaces that you're in around sort of building community. So your investor says things are looking interesting, right? We like what you're doing. You're in the middle of raising money. What happens?
So we gain a contract during the pandemic, right? We gain momentum, a contract with the state of New Jersey, so that we can support resiliency planning with Irys, the engineering company out of the Netherlands. Well, it's a global company. Right. That happened during the pandemic because we shifted our focus, right? And we needed to, support this type of efforts, these public involvement efforts. And we knew that it was going to go digital for the next months. So we developed this flawless product that now is being introduced into the state of New Jersey. And now they're going to use that, for a two-way communication on planning and building and development in the state of New Jersey, right? That happened. And because of that, another investor came in and said, I'm in again. And so we finalized the funding in July. Well, it was more like June, right? A lot of the investment had already come in. So that was clutch. I mean, it was a matter of timing, right? Sure. If we look back, we made the decision to raise money in the summer of 2019, right? And we went to market in the mid-fall of 2019. If we had made the decision about raising money in 2020, all of this would have been another story.
Oh, yeah.
It was whole time, and we didn't know there was a pandemic coming, right? We didn't know any of that. But we knew that we needed to act, right, in 2019, and we knew that we wanted to scale. And when we raised the capital, 80% of the capital that we raised came in January, right? Just before the pandemic. So we were ready. We actually started hiring also people during the pandemic. A series of events led us to be well positioned to endure the collateral of a pandemic, right?
And more than endure. I'm going to say, actually, I hope I don't eat my words in 20 years, but more than endure, right? But to position yourselves to be successful, right? Like there's this aspect of taking advantage of an opportunity or a crisis before it takes an opportunity on you, right?
and there's a lot of that, right? We saw a lot of repurposing, right? I have friends that own clothing lines, right? That shifted from developing T-shirts to face masks, right? And they supplied many organizations throughout the world, and they're making really good money right now, right? Or the automobile industry, right? Repurposed their focus during the pandemic to actually develop ventilators, right? So we saw a lot of that, right? But that's in the short term, right? I mean, let's study the long term and the impact, right? But I think that this type of black swan events, right, are chief that will create a long-term digital disruption, right? And I think there's three industries that we need to look at, right?
Sure.
Is supply chains, right? Supply chains is one.
Clearly.
Bureaucracies, governments or large enterprises that don't use digital will become digital, right? And one of the most important ones that I don't think enough people are talking about it right now. You just hear a lot of people talk about it, but more on social media. But I don't see enough, actors in the entrepreneurial ecosystem tackling this issue, and that is mental health. Mm. We still have no idea how this pandemic will affect us psychologically, right? We are seeing how it has affected us psychologically on decision making, right? Anywhere from the financial industries to, let's say, the medical industries. A lot of decisions have been made because of psychological, let's say, moments, right, where people have to make these decisions on the go, but also because they are cautious or they fear what's happening with the pandemic. So I think those are the three sectors that will definitely be affected, right? But at the same time, that's an opportunity, right? Just like we saw the opportunity in working with Irys, right, and helping those public involvement efforts. And it was one of those three that I mentioned, which is bureaucracies, right, going digital, right? I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs are going to be able to find momentum today, right? I'm not being overly optimistic. I mean, there's a lot of challenges that we're facing, right? But look at when the SARS pandemic happened, right? 2002, 2004. What was an outcome of SARS in the entrepreneurial world? Alibaba, was born out of the frustration from people not wanting to go to stores because they could get, the SARS was very contagious, right? And so they were afraid of going to shop around any shopping mall or let's say to the grocery store. So everything became digital, right? And that's when Alibaba thrived. I mean, Alibaba is a direct result of what happened with SARS, right? And then what happened with the recession, right, in 2008? I mean, we saw companies like Uber and Airbnb thrive because people wanted to save more money when they were traveling, right? And they didn't want to spend so much money on hotels and so on. So I think today we're going to see how a lot of industries will become more digital, right? And with that, you have opportunities and you have challenges, right? I think, tech companies and companies that are already well-versed or educated on how to use technology and those type of mediums will perform okay and will do really good as they progress, and they will adapt and maybe continue to thrive economically and be successful. But then you have small and medium-sized businesses that do not use digital and depend on the face-to-face engagement, right? That are also largely driven by community, right? And I think those businesses need to adapt to this digital trend. Otherwise, it will be really difficult for them to succeed, right? And we're beginning to see a lot of mom and pop shops, close because a lot of them depended on the flow of people walking into their businesses and purchasing their food or their services, right? So I worry about those type of businesses, right? Sure. Because, for example, Irys is now in the West Side. We moved our HQ from downtown to now the West Side, and we love it here, right? And we are now employing interns that are going to the university nearby or are in high school here in the West Side. And the idea for us is to also educate young people in the West Side about the idea of, enterprising with technology, right, and to learn about technology. We're doing that also because we understand that the future is going to largely depend on technology. But when talking to folks here in the West Side and talking to some of the owners of some taquerias or so on, they don't feel too comfortable yet with technology, right? Yeah. And I was just talking to one of them about how they need to onboard their taqueria to Uber Eats or to Favor, right? And their response was, it was a cautious response because they didn't know how to use these tools, right? And the reality is that everybody's ordering from these food apps, right? I do it all the time. And a lot of people that don't want to go to a restaurant because they fear they're going to get sick, etc. They're ordering on time. Where am I going with all of this? That these type of businesses need to adapt and understand that they need to learn how to use these tools to compete in this type of post-COVID environment, right? But who's going to teach them how to use those tools? Right. Who's going to nurture them, right, in regards to adopting these tools? Or what if there's not enough good internet in that area, right? So now you get into the topics of digital divide and so on, right? So I think the pandemic is going to, pose a lot of challenges and opportunities. For me, in that moment, I saw an opportunity. I went ahead. I raised the capital. I got a contract with Irys, which is now we're going to be able to scale it in different parts of the country. And then we closed a deal with the U.S. Air Force. So I saw opportunity and I went after it. And I hope that, we continue to grow as a company and employ more people here in San Antonio during this health crisis that we are facing. But more than anything, I hope that I can continue to learn about how this pandemic, it will continue to shift our focus, yet, not lose the momentum or, the willingness to introduce our services and products to the community that need it the most.
You've given us a lot here, so then we just sort of recap. No, this is really phenomenal, right? So you're saying part of the present moment and part of the future is this importance of being digital and being online, right? And so the present crisis really shows us the need that if you have a business model or if you've got a business that really relies or that isn't online in some particular way, this crisis is showing you the need to do that as quickly and as important as possible. It doesn't matter whether or not you're a taqueria or whether or not you are a city, right? Your engagement with the community is really dependent upon sort of engaging with technology. That, of course, sort of cascades other questions with regards to access to technology and high-speed internet access and inequalities that sort of keep certain populations from being able to access that information or not. But that's really an important sort of aspect of one of the things that you mentioned. The other aspect that I want to pull a little thread on a little bit is this aspect of community that you sort of talked about, right? So you're saying, look, we moved to the West Side and we're proud that we're now on the West Side. We're working with the community. The pandemic. And we get this sense as well in the previous talk that the present sort of crisis showed us the need for community, not only supporting your local taqueria, your local sort of small business because it's important, but also the need for us to sort of reach in and dive in deep in the community. You've mentioned sort of how that opened up new opportunities for you with Irys, right? The opportunity to work now in bureaucracies and working on the procurement side, working on the dashboards, working in the military. How, if you take a look at the present moment, how is community a critical part of how you're building your business moving forward?
That's a great question. I think when you think about startups, tech startups, right, you think about Silicon Valley, number one, right? And then you think about, New York. I mean, you think, yeah, of course, New York is always there, but it's always Silicon Valley, right? That's what people think about.
There's going to be people in Austin who might disagree with you, but let's go.
I mean, Austin as well, right? So you got Silicon Valley, the Silicon Slopes, Austin, and New York, right? I mean, those are the key areas, right, of tech, which in a way is true. But I think that's changing, Luis. That is changing, right? I mean, you have there's a movement happening across the country, right, where you have more startups flourishing in areas where you wouldn't think of it, right? I have a friend who has an accelerator in Cincinnati, right? And he's seen a lot of turnover. I mean, he's seeing a lot of entrepreneurs start companies and leave corporations or corporate jobs to start their own businesses during the pandemic, right? And for us too, here in San Antonio, I feel a lot of people are venturing off to, exploring the realm of entrepreneurship. But there's something key that you mentioned, community. If the community is not there, right, to support this type of environment, right, where entrepreneurs can thrive, experiment with the ideas, get funded, or use, the city or the communities within the city as testing ground for their products, then these startups and these entrepreneurs will not thrive. They will not succeed. I think innovation, needs nurturing from its environment, from the public sector, the private sector, the academia. It needs people invested in nurturing ideas so that the economies, local economies or macro economies, can succeed, right? And what I'm talking about is that if you have a business that is a great idea and succeeds in a given city like San Antonio, what's going to happen? It's going to have direct economic impact. More jobs are going to get created.
Right.
More retention of bright minds and students at Trinity University will stay in San Antonio to, be part of the success of that business or tech startup, right? So we need to celebrate the small victories, right, of entrepreneurs here in San Antonio. And we need to be more inclusive of that process. And what I mean is that we need to motivate, investors that are heavily investing in real estate to look at also the entrepreneurial track, right? And to consider entertaining the idea of investing also in Black and brown, entrepreneurs, right? And so I see some of it happening in San Antonio. I have, some of my investors here in San Antonio believed in my idea, believed in my startup, right? Pat, Graham, Henry, Victor Miramontes, like all these people that believed in what we were doing, right? But they also believed in what we were doing because we were so heavily involved in building community. We go back to what you mentioned, community.
Yeah.
Why are we interested in building community? Because at the end of the day, it all comes down to community, right? Our product is geared towards, improving the life of people in communities, right? So if we don't nurture our own community in our backyard in San Antonio, how are we going to do that in other cities with our tools and products? So that's why when we launched 311 SA here in San Antonio, we were actively engaged in promoting the tool, the results, the data-driven decisions that the city is taking because of our tools, in going the extra mile, right? And helping the city with any type of bottleneck regarding technology, being mentors of the CivTech SA program,
right.
Helping out in every way we can, because it is our backyard. It is our community. And if we don't contribute to our community, how are we going to expect, investors or leaders in the community to look this way, to look into the entrepreneurship or the tech startup world if the entrepreneurs are not building that dialogue enough that they're not going to capture the attention of other leaders in the community, right? So I think entrepreneurs need to be louder in San Antonio. Entrepreneurs need to be louder.
Well, and you also bring up another interesting point, not only about being louder in the community, but also because of technology, because of the fact that the situation that we're in with this way of communicating with each other, right? With Zoom calls and being remote. We've got this interesting sort of present moment of people being physically distant, but yet being socially close in some particular way. So what's interesting, and one sort of great thing about what you've been doing with Irys and the way that you work with your team is that not only is your business really community and really focused on the communities that you're engaging with and the customers that you're working with, but you're also working internationally simultaneously at the same time, right? You've got a deployment in San Antonio, you've got a deployment in Mexico, right? You're working with the community in the Valley, and you're working with the community here in San Antonio, right? And so there's this aspect of the present moment that actually international or national or statewide with the state of New Jersey, right? Like, it doesn't mean that just because that customer is in St. Louis that you can't serve them or be close with them or engage with them, or the U.S. Army, right, with all the bases and all the communities they support, that one initial. So one interesting sort of model that you show us with regards to the future of entrepreneurship is that technology enables you to be engaging closely with collaborators that not only are down the street, but also could be on the other side of the world. So how is it that you guys are effectively being able to incorporate these sort of multiple communities that you're engaging with, primarily internationally? And how is it that you see sort of the present moment in engaging with them?
Definitely. So the headquarters of Irys is here in San Antonio. The idea of Irys happened here in San Antonio. We work closely, with the engineers in different parts of the country and also in Mexico, and we deploy our tools all around the world.
Right.
The distribution is massive, right? Yet we are a 15-person startup. So
I remember you guys when you guys were 2, but let's move on.
Yeah, exactly. The Geekdom days. Yeah. That's where I met you. I met you at Geekdom. Yeah, I remember.
I remember when you guys were just 2.
Yeah, it was.
So I'm thrilled, right? You went from 2 to 15, right?
That was in a span of 2 years. It's exciting, and we will continue to grow that. We are actually hiring right now. So anyone who's watching, we're hiring a full stack developer and a project coordinator for the U.S. Air Force project that we have. So 2 positions locally here in San Antonio. Anyone who's interested, email us at info@heyirys.com. I have to place the ad. I had to, just in case.
Always be selling. But you're international, so how are you able to engage these multiple communities around the globe in your business? For some folks, right, that's hard to think about. Like, I know what I'm doing right now in my community, in this city, in this town. My goal might be to sort of go up 35 and maybe be in Austin or maybe in Houston. You're like saying, nah, man, like just go global the moment you have. How are you effectively sort of?
So as I mentioned, right, how distributed our operation is, right? But I think, the one thing that we have that is an advantage is that we are all digital natives. We understand how to use digital tools, right? And our tool can be implemented digitally, right? Meaning, so if we sell to a given city, let's say, I don't know, Houston buys our product, right? We don't have to be there sitting down with anyone to implement the product. They can actually download the software, right? And they can implement it. We can have seminars to educate them on how to use the tool. So everything can be done via Zoom or via Slack and all these different channels that we have, all these tools that we have to help that process, right? I think that was one advantage that we had prior to, the pandemic, that we were already working on implementing and doing a lot of our outreach and business development online, right? And so that was a huge advantage that I think only, tech startups that provide this type of SaaS, services can take advantage of, right? I mean, if you had a restaurant, et cetera, you can't do that, right? And so, we are taking advantage of that because we see an opportunity in scaling fast, right? We're now moving away from very intensive, high price of our products to lowering the price actually, so that we can hit more communities throughout the world, so people can download the software, potential clients, and use it within their communities. And so that is really interesting, right? Because now we're gonna have a more intense approach into deploying and implementing our tools, and everything's gonna be achieved via an online medium, such as Zoom, again, Slack, Google Hangouts, you name it, right? And it's also interesting is that a lot of the companies that we're working with, right, the engineering firms and, the technology and architecture firms that we're working with have a strong focus now on using digital mediums because they were forced to use them because of the pandemic, right? So it's now even easier than it was before the pandemic, to sell a product to a potential client and do the entire business development effort and implementation effort online. And so that's one opportunity that I do see in regards to how hyper-connected we have become because of the pandemic. And you mentioned something, right? We might be physically, distanced, but socially we are very connected, right? And so that's the main focus of our products, right? Is building community, through these digital mediums. One product that we're scaling is the product that we're working on in regards to public involvement, right? Which is going to be called the City Shaper. We're still defining the name. But this platform, what essentially will do is build a two-way communication channel between, an entity such as our Arcadis, which is an engineering company, or let's say a government agency like an NPO, right? And when they're deploying their public involvement efforts, all they have to do is launch this tool so that people can engage, through this app with them, right? And it's a closed engagement, right? You need a code to enter that channel of communication, but you can download the app on the store, you put in the code, and now you have direct communication between you and the developer who's developing a street or a highway in your backyard here in San Antonio or in Austin, right? And so it's interesting because that product, we want to scale it rapidly all throughout the US and Europe as well. Arcadis is based in Europe, so we have a lot of opportunity to tap into the European market. But the way we're going to do it is all digital. So we're going to continue to sell our products digitally. We're going to continue to implement our products through this digital medium. So we don't see it as an obstacle. We see it as an opportunity, and actually it's moving more people to actually adopt these tools. We were using Zoom before it was a big trend, right? I mean, I think 70% or almost like 100% of my round that I was funding, that I was raising, was actually raised via Zoom calls. I met with all the investors via Zoom calls. All the pitches that I gave were through Zoom calls. So I was having 5 to 7 Zoom calls a day that were like an hour long. So I was literally Zoom fatigued, but I didn't know the term until it got popularized because of the pandemic. But I used to see my wife at the end of the day, and she was like, "What's wrong with you? You seem like you're drained. You're like super tired." I'm like, "I don't know. It's just pitching online is a lot harder." But nobody understood. When I used to tell them, they were like, "Okay, but you're pitching in your pajamas." I'm like, "No, I wasn't wearing pajamas. I was wearing shorts, but I had a jacket up here." But it's you get Zoom fatigue. But that's how we've done it in the past. That's how we continue to do it, Luis. And I think that's going to be definitely the future. You see how remote working has become a trend, right? And now
it's more than the trend, right? It's the way people are working.
It is. You have Facebook and you have Amazon and all these companies now being a lot more flexible on remote training. And to tell you the truth, I think that remote training and working really helps people actually, be more comfortable. And whenever they don't feel going to the office or driving to the office and the whole logistics of getting to the office, right? I think it takes a lot from productivity. So I think remote working and training is going to be something that we're going to see in the next couple of years become a huge trend. And I think when you...
Or it's flexible, right?
Flexible. Flexible.
I'm thinking from my own perspective here. Are there individuals with small children, right, where you really don't want to be at home because you just don't want to be at home, right?
Definitely.
Productivity with regards to being in a household with small children, sort of the task shifting that happens in your role from being a worker to a parent, to a caregiver, to a husband, to a wife, right? So this aspect of remote work definitely is a trend, but I think also it points to the fact that there's still a need for offices and co-working spaces. And routines.
Nothing's going to substitute that experience ever. I mean, nothing's going to substitute the face-to-face experience ever. I mean, when we need to talk about big ideas or big decisions with my team, we meet in person. Yeah, we all have masks and all that, but there's nothing that is going to substitute the face-to-face experience. I love that experience, and I miss it. I miss it so much, right? But I do think that, in some cases, right, remote working actually becomes more productive. I agree.
Right.
If you have kids at home, etc., it's hard to concentrate and so on. But, think about that person that doesn't have a vehicle, needs to drive 30 miles to get to an office, but doesn't also have the financing to buy a new car, right? And it's just getting started, right? But they can do it at home, right? They have the capabilities, they have everything going for them, but maybe they don't have, the right financing to buy a used car or a new car, right? For that person, it's going to work perfectly, right? For the person that is an executive at a company, it's not going to work perfectly. As a founder, I love being with my team members, right?
Sure.
Right. I want to be face to face. I'm actually in my office right now, right? So I'm not at home, right? But I think it's going to be that flexible structure that is going to allow companies to continue to evolve and adapt in a post-COVID world.
So let's talk about the post-COVID world. This is a great transition for us to think about sort of what the future is. So you've really been incredible to sort of share with all of us sort of your perspective of what the future looks like from the perspective of Irys. What does the future for San Antonio look like from your perspective? What does the future of entrepreneurship in San Antonio look like from your vantage point?
Yeah, so I think in terms of innovation, right, and entrepreneurship, I think that the longer term innovation and changes in trends will come about as consumers and businesses normalize the impact on psychological and the economic situation, right? So as these, moving pieces become normal, right? When we normalize, we will start seeing how this long term of innovation is going to how it's going to be shaped, right? I think that the future of San Antonio will greatly depend on how proactive we are in helping our business leaders and also the small business owners. I've been talking to a lot of people in different industries, and a lot of folks are either encouraged by the opportunities that COVID has brought, right?
Right.
If you are in the PPE arena, you're growing rapidly right now. If you are in the food industry arena, right, or service arena, it's been a tough couple of months, right? A tough year to say the least, actually. So, but at the same time, what I see is that with so many institutions shedding, talented and well qualified employees, right? Because you're seeing a lot of people being laid off, et cetera. I don't know. Perhaps this crisis here in San Antonio, its aftermath will encourage more people to take on the risk of creating a company, right? Of building an enterprise. When you think that they have identified some of the gaps that they saw in their own corporations where they were working, or what they see today in this environment that we're operating, I think a lot of talented folks that may have been laid off, or maybe are not, they can't find a job right now because of the situation we're in, will take on the risk of entrepreneurship. So I wouldn't say that, because we were just talking at the beginning of this, right, that the current environment is a double-edged sword, right, for entrepreneurship. It might discourage, some people to think about this as a career or a job choice, right? Talking about entrepreneurship, but it also might encourage other people where they see some gaps that need to be filled, or maybe these people were displaced without a job or can't find a job, and they will be forced to become entrepreneurial, right? So I think it's going to be a little bit of both, but I think it's definitely going to encourage people to explore the opportunity within entrepreneurship. And as that happens, right, I think San Antonio is definitely going to embrace the digital mediums in the larger setting, and there's going to be strong movements, and we already see it, right, with the efforts to introduce internet to different parts of town that don't have that digital access, and to try and attempt to bridge the digital divide, which is very alive here in San Antonio. And so I think for future entrepreneurs, we're going to see a lot of these small and medium-sized businesses embrace technology. Even the taquerias that we were just talking about,
Sure,
embrace technology, right? And I feel like a lot of services will definitely go digital, right? And so we're going to see a lot of digital entrepreneurship, with the end result of the service being either some sort of product or physical service, but the connection and opportunity will definitely start becoming more digital. Now, let's be also optimistic about the scenario that we're in, right? I hope, right, that the scientific community continues to be proactive and we find a vaccine. And who knows, Luis, maybe we look back in 2 years and, a lot of the changes that happen might revert and go back to what we were. But one thing is for sure, right? The digital outcome is forever going to change across the world. I mean, things will definitely go more digital. That's one thing that has been already changed in this post-COVID world and will definitely happen, right? But who knows? Maybe, a lot of people I hear saying that, physical, the commercial entities such as, restaurants and so on will now be all outdoors, or they might never open their doors again, and they might only go for Uber Eats and those type of mediums and deliver food through those mechanisms. I don't know. I mean, as humans, we crave social interaction, right? And even today, things have normalized a little bit here in San Antonio, and you're beginning to see a lot of restaurants open their doors, right? And people are flocking to those restaurants, right? Because people crave social interaction. So I'm not too sure about that idea of restaurants moving into a model of just delivering food services through, these type of food apps. I think those type of entities will never disappear because people they crave social interaction. But the way that they deliver their services might go digital, right? Like that online menu, right? That you go into a restaurant and you use the QR code. You're not touching the menu anymore. Or maybe exactly, or they do food delivery, right? Through apps and so on. So a lot of things will merge into this digital ecosystem that we're coming in, right? And so I think all ages across the board will embrace technology. The boomers, Gen Xers, millennials, Gen Zers are now old involve using technology mediums, right? And so that's something that I think is definitely going to help propel entrepreneurship, the adoption of technology, because it's going to be easier to do business online. It's going to be easier to sell your services, online. It's going to be easier to connect with potential clients online, like you mentioned, right? That we're doing. Irys is selling and implementing tools all online. So I think this digital outcome that we will see in the next 10 years will define entrepreneurship in San Antonio. And I'm also hopeful that, communities in San Antonio, such as the West Side or South Side, will start embracing technology and using these internet, environments to create influence. Because when you look back at what happened in the dot-com era, right, the internet gave, companies and gave a lot of different organizations the ability to create their websites, their content. But now the internet has given the ability to create influence in the sort of doing business development, implementation, selling, or even the political outcomes. So that's what I see the future of entrepreneurship is going to be in San Antonio. However, one thing that I'm cautious about is that we cannot forget about those folks that do not have access to digital mediums. We cannot forget about, the underserved communities, and we need to train them. We need to train them through skills-based programs, right, that will enable their success and that will allow them to incorporate to companies that are using technology to develop manufacturing or products and services like Irys is. So it's important for the mayor of San Antonio and other leaders in the community of San Antonio to nurture the skills of San Antonians through programs and sort of let's say platforms that will enable their education to grow or their skill set, right? So that they can adapt to the new trends of future employers or entrepreneurs that are going to create jobs in San Antonio.
Yeah, that's a very clear need, right? I ended one of the previous session with a question about like what does San Antonio need, and you beautifully brought attention that there's critical sort of needs, not only bridging the digital divide, but also aspects with regards to educational attainment, with regards to the actual sort of real challenges that people might have with transit or access. So it was a real beautiful way. Now, full disclosure with regards to how we sort of partly planned this session. Yes, we picked our panelists because they were entrepreneurs who were doing work in this space. It's been great working with the organizers and identifying great thought leaders like yourself and Christian and Sarah, who not only were doing the work here in San Antonio and have a future and will be shaping that future. And so the last set of questions comes with something else that comes with selecting all of you. One aspect that sort of happened in the previous sort of panel and that is part of the future of entrepreneurship is that it's really clear that the future of entrepreneurship is going to be woman-led, it's going to be brown, it's going to be black. There's going to be folks that were traditionally underrepresented in how we think about tech in your space and entrepreneurship, who are now going to be leading that space. There's been a tension not only with income inequality and social justice in this particular stage of what's happening on the social side, but certainly when we see sort of the percentage of women-owned businesses that get VC and early stage venture funding, when we look at the percentage of brown and black-owned businesses that are getting early stage and venture funding, you're clearly in that space. Your team is brown, you're in the West Side. How does the future of entrepreneurship look like from your perspective as a leader in this movement of having entrepreneurship be with one that's more representative of our population here in the city and here in San Antonio?
Less than 1% of Latino co-founders raise venture capital.
Correct. In
the entrepreneurial tech sector, right? In the US.
You're one of them.
It's crazy. It's a really low number. Yet, the percentage of Latinos in Texas has grown incrementally. And we are now, I think, more than 60% Latinos in Texas. I think that the number's going to be higher after the census. Yet we don't see enough tech entrepreneurs or, let's say high impact entrepreneurs in Texas that are Latinos. Why is that, right?
Yeah.
I think a lot has to do with education.
Sure.
A lot has to do with the fear of taking risk, right? My parents are both entrepreneurs. They understand what it means to start a business, yet they were not educated on what it is to start a tech company, right? And when I approached them, telling them that I wanted to be a tech entrepreneur, they turn around and say, "Mijito, what are you talking about?" Right? They wanted to become a lawyer or a doctor, an accountant, right? But a tech entrepreneur, that's only for, the, Anglo community of Silicon Valley. But a Latino in Texas, right, whose parents are not involved in the tech world at all, wanting to become a tech entrepreneur, that sounds nuts, right? And so I received their full support, 100% of their support. But at the beginning, it's not that they discouraged me, right? But they fear for my future, right? My professional future. And that happens a lot, with the Latino community in San Antonio and other parts of Texas, for example, that Latinos are not encouraged to venture into building these high impact businesses because of fear of some of the outcomes of failure, for example. And we need to change that by educating, Latinos that it is okay to venture, to taking this risk to build these amazing companies, or become more entrepreneurial on the tech sector, for example, right? That it is okay. But how do we achieve that, right? We achieve that by having models, role models in the community that can do it, right? So when you interview Christian and Sarah, that we're talking about community, I go back to square one, which is community. Why did I move to the west side of San Antonio to nurture the idea of tech development in potential young entrepreneurs? Because it matters.
Right.
If I'm already doing it, right, I need to also support and mentor future generations if we want to have that future that you talked about, Luis, that is going to be more led by women, by Black and brown Latinos, Black and brown entrepreneurs. If we want to get there, we need to be more collaborative, right? And we need to embrace, the risks in becoming entrepreneurs, but we also need to embrace the risk in helping more people. Why do I say risk? Because people say that they don't have time to do it, right? And it becomes some sort of risk to, venture into becoming a volunteer and helping your community, when it shouldn't. It shouldn't be a business risk. It should be a commitment to your community, right? Don't see it as it's going to take away from your business opportunities,
Right?
Yes, I understand we're limited with time, right, in a day, but we should explore ways to help and give back to our communities if we want to see that future that you talked about, Luis, right? So I think it's going to take more education and organizing of the entrepreneurs that are already being successful or that are enterprising in educating other young future entrepreneurs.
I guess that's our signal that our time is up. Beto, this has been just a fantastic conversation with you to continue sort of exploring this question of what the future of entrepreneurship looks like. I mean, you've given us a lot to think about in this session about how entrepreneurship in the future is definitely sort of engaged with what's happening digitally. You echoed some of the previous session with regards that it's centered on community, that it is centered in finding the opportunity and that hustle in the present moment. And one thing that I've always loved about City Flag and your background in policy and your background in sort of ensuring that voices of communities are heard is that it's participatory, right? It's developers engaging with these communities and people engaging with the bureaucracy to transform. So it's been really a fantastic session to sort of share and have this conversation with you. I thank all the folks who've tuned in for this session. On behalf of San Antonio Startup Week, now month, and Trinity University, I'm Luis Martinez, and thank you so much, Beto, for
thank you, Luis, and thank you for being a leader in our community for entrepreneurship. And anyone that is in the audience that wants to connect with Irys, send me an email. Luis can share it with you, but it's altamirano@heyirys.com. I'm here to support you. If you have any idea, you want to test out an idea with us, or you want to talk to us about an idea or learn more about Irys, I'm here to help.
Great. Thank you so much. And for the rest of you, thank you so much. And I hope you enjoy the rest of San Antonio Startup Week.